Hello everyone. This week on the CEHcast channel, we're going to be skipping out on Greedy Keeps. We might have it later in the week, but we're missing out this Monday. It's the first time in a while, I'm pretty sure. But we're going to be discussing a spoiler card from this set, but in deep detail. So we're going to be talking about Wheel of Misfortune, one of the stranger cards from Commander Legends so far. And it's one of the cards I've gotten the most feedback on. I've mentioned on Twitter a few times, in our Patreon Discord, and in the public Discord mostly, actually, about how I think this card's really strong. I think it's actually, it's just below Wheel of Fortune, right around Windfall. So if that gives you an idea of like where I think it is, it's close to Windfall. However, it's more situational than Windfall. Here's an example. If you have a Narset in play, Windfall is significantly better, right? If you are a Corvold deck, like I play Corvold, or Paco, and you just need 7 cards, this card is significantly better. Sure, your opponents can try to prevent you from drawing 7, but they might take 20 damage doing that, and then you have a Paco or a Corvold in play, and you just beat them to death. So there's definitely some play to this card. I'm already kind of giving you some hints of it, but I'm gonna read the card first, and then we can start discussing it. So Wheel of Misfortune is a sorcery for 2 and a red. It says each player secretly chooses a number. Then they reveal those numbers. It deals damage equal to the greatest number chosen by players that chose it. Then each player who didn't choose the minimum number discards their hand and draws 7. So here's an example. I choose 1, Timmy and Tammy choose 2, and Spike chooses 3. Spike will take 3. Spike, Timmy, and Tammy will discard their hands and draw 7. And me having chosen 1, I won't do anything. So hopefully that gives you an example of how the card works. So why is this card complicated? Why are people having a hard time understanding how to evaluate this card? Well, first of all, it looks like a Punisher card. It sounds like a Punisher card. By all metrics, it should be a Punisher card, but it's not really a Punisher card. So what's an example of a Punisher card? I'll pull one up. So Browbeat is a really common example of a Punisher card. So Browbeat is 2 and a red for a sorcery. Any player may have Browbeat deal 5 damage to them. If no one does, target player draws 3 cards. So in red, this is a card that says 3 mana draw 3, which is pretty powerful, but an opponent may instead take 5 damage. You may also take 5 damage if they play a Notion Thief in response or something, but for the most part, that's kind of how this works, right? So your opponents have control over what happens, and you don't. You played the card, which means that you're probably happy with either outcome, but if you're not happy with either outcome, your opponents are going to choose the outcome they think you want the least. So these cards are traditionally very bad. There was one that had Jumpstart. Maybe it is Jumpstart. There's one that had like a flashback back in the Ravnica set that actually saw some standard play. It was deal 4 or draw 3. That ended up being pretty close, if I remember. So, but for the most part, Punisher cards are pretty bad. So what makes Wheel of Misfortune not a Punisher card? So going back to it. Well, first of all, you have some amount of control. When you play this card, you get to name a number. And if your opponents name a smaller number, you take damage, but you do still draw 7. So you have basically your whole life total to work with to draw 7 cards, which, you know, is not always great, but it does mean that you have quite a bit of control. So if your life total is higher than all of your opponents, you basically can you have the ability to guarantee you'll draw 7. Now, you might not always draw 7 when this happens, but, you know, it's really hard not to if you need to. Next, because it's secret, there's no bidding. So if it was like a bidding game where each player would bid a number, and then the player who's bids the highest number takes the damage, draws a 7, that'd be a very different card. But because it's secretive, your opponents don't have the full confidence in each other that you might have if it was a bidding game. Now your opponents can all say, hey, Braden has 40 life. We have 50 life. Let's all say 41, and that way we know that will draw 7 and Braden won't. That is definitely a possible scenario, and that's when this card's really, really not good, is when there's a huge life total difference and your opponents can really absorb some of that life total damage. But to back that up, if you're playing a commander like Corvold or Paco, it doesn't really matter, because if they use all their life total to work together to beat you, you just beat them to death. So that's another interesting aspect of the card. Now, when someone plays this card against you, what should be your goal? Well, if they're in a black deck, that means they care about their life total quite a bit. They're playing cards like Ad Nauseam, Necropotence, stuff like that. So you should make it your goal to make it so either they have to pay a very high number or they don't draw anything. So one way you can do that is if your 3 opponents have a lot of life, you can all work together and say, hey, we're fine. We would much rather he draw 7 and lose 15 life, and we lose... Sorry. We would much rather that we all lose 15 life. He has to outbid us going to 16. He goes to 4 life and then draws 7, and we don't lose anything. Or in the opportunity that opponent can't make that trade, you all end up still taking 15 and you're all fine with that. If they're a Kess player, they can't really pressure your life total. If none of your opponents are pressuring life totals, that's a fair trade. Now, another problem comes up is when one of your opponents is pressuring life totals, and you have to try to get them to be the ones who take the damage. So there's going to be a lot of politics with this card. And although you choose the number secretly, you can discuss what numbers you're going to pick. So it is possible for you to say, hey, let's all choose 9. Then our opponent has to say 10, and then what you really do is you choose 2. And then you're like, all right, I didn't want to discard my hand anyway, and I don't want I want to make sure that I'm safe from maybe the opponent saying, oh, I'll just choose 8, and now I've done 9 damage to each of my opponents. So there's a lot of secretness there, and one interesting thing is that over the time, you're going to have like a meta game in your play group where people know you tend to lie, or people know you tend to tell the truth, or let's say you always do 5. You always do 5, and no matter what, you just always do 5. Because let's say you're a control deck and you want your opponents to always have to pay as much life to draw the 7. So you always do 5. You never do 1. You never do whatever the lowest number is. You always do 5, which forces everyone else's life that they have to pay to start at 5. The bidding starts at 5 because the lowest bidder always starts at 5 instead of 1. However, you also might, be a type of player that is inconsistent in what you want. So it's hard to create like a rapport with your opponents because you vary quite wildly depending on the game, because your deck has moments where it can't discard its hand and draw 7, and it has moments where it has to. And so you have a hard time creating this like meta game because you have such inconsistent answers. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is deciding how much life you should pay when you're casting this spell. So the first thing you need to consider is, do any of my opponents not want to discard their hands? So if your opponent just tutored twice, it's very unlikely they want to discard their hands because they're setting up a combo in their upcoming turn. This means they're deeply incentivized to start at a lower number because they really don't want to be this person who, discards. So you may even be the person who always does 5 because you always want to push people's life totals, always want to push the damage that people take up by 5. But in this case, you're like, I just tutored twice, I'm going to do 1. I'm going to be really safe. I'm pretty sure you can't do 0. The translation doesn't say that, but there's a 0 in the text you can kind of see, and I've had some people tell me you can't do 0. So let's say you do 1, lowest number you can do, because you really can't discard your hand. Well, if you, as your opponent, if I know that my opponent is going to name 1 because they just tutored twice, I can just name 3 or 4, and I know I'm safe because they won't do that. Now, again, if you're the opponent who doesn't want to discard their hand, but you're like, hey, I really want to get my opponent, I'll name 4 because I know they think I'll do 1. I don't really care about these cards. They're okay. I tutored for interaction mostly, or maybe a stacks piece, but this wheel's going to be so disruptive, it doesn't really matter to me. I'll choose 4, knowing they might check 2 or 3 because they think that they're safe to do that, and then I get them. And so that's where the fun of this card is. That's where it's really challenging. That's where the metagame matters. If you just always, I think the best way to start out is I want to play this as like a Necropotence. So I'm going to pay 3 mana. I'm going to lose 7 life and draw 7 cards. I think that's like a super fair. I think if Wheel of Fortune was a balanced Magic card, that's probably what it would do to you anyway. You'd probably take 7. So I think that's a really good place to start. And if you want to compete over it and you don't really care about your life total, maybe going to 9 or 10 is a good start. But I think 7 is a really nice, pay 3 mana, pay 7 life, draw 7 cards is still really fair. And if your opponents end up figuring that out and they start doing 10, maybe you have to go to 13, or maybe just say, hey, I'm fine playing this as a disruptive wheel. It happens. So that is some of my thinking on Wheel of Misfortune. It's definitely a very complex card. It's definitely a very difficult card to evaluate in the short term, but I think the more we play with it, the more we're going to realize this card is very, very, very powerful. If you're like a Paco deck, like I slammed it right into Paco, I always want to draw 7. Windfall doesn't always do that. And I don't care about my life total at all. I'll pay 20 life if I have to. There you go. Wheel of Misfortune, really, really sick. So if you enjoyed this and you really missed Greedy Keeps, though, please comment below that you missed Greedy Keeps. Give me an idea for a deck to do this week. Maybe I'll put it out by Friday. I have off on Tuesday, so I could probably start putting together an episode on Tuesday if I'm not busy watching the election in the United States. But if you enjoyed this content, please leave a comment below. If you want to see something different, please leave a comment below. We've gotten a lot of comments in the most recent episodes, and it's been really exciting. So thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.